I'm Ethan Harper. Last week, my parents looked me in the eyes and said they regretted having me. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I wasn't the perfect child they wanted. For 45 years, I tried to earn their approval. I gave them my savings. I stood in the background. I let them erase me, bit by bit. But today, as I stepped into the Harper house in Tacoma, I still hoped, even just a small spark, that this time would be different. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video. They say spring softens everything. The sunlight, the breeze, the way people talk. But this morning, nothing in that house felt soft. I parked a few houses down, holding a tray of homemade walnut bread, the smell of butter and walnuts rising, still warm. The house appeared unchanged. An old mansion with stained glass windows, a dusty porch swing, an ancient oak I climbed as a kid, back when I thought I'd be noticed. I adjusted the fountain pen in my pocket, a gift from Dad when I was 10, his wordless apology. I climbed the steps, the tray heavy in my hands. Inside, the smell of coffee and cinnamon greeted me. My sister Claire's voice rang out before I saw her, bright, sharp, like she was giving a speech. She sat next to Mom, Margaret, holding a glass of wine, though it wasn't noon. Dad, Richard, was at the head of the table, eyes glued to his tablet, scrolling news like he was in a board meeting. No one stood. No one greeted me. Claire glanced over, said a curt "tay," then went back to talking about her new tech project. I set the tray on the table's edge, forcing a smile. "Walnut bread?" I said softly. "Dad's favorite." No response. Nathan chimed in, bragging about a big case he'd won. Dad nodding absently, like someone not really listening but pretending to care. I quietly pulled out a chair, sitting at the far end, like a shadow. I waited for a moment to share. My solo art exhibit at Pacific Arts Center had just happened, drawing over 300 guests, even getting a write-up in the local paper. I cleared my throat. "My exhibit last week," but Claire raised her hand, cutting me off. Wait, Dad. Tell them about that investor who wants you to speak at the conference. He's a big deal." Dad leaned back, arms crossed. "Yeah, a promising young guy. Reminds me of someone who listens." I closed my mouth. The bread cooled. I tried again. Quieter. The exhibit, lots of people came. Silence. Mom glanced at me, lips pursed. "Ethan, you've always been, how do I put it, theatrical, even as a kid. You don't need a crowd to be proud, son." The word theatrical cut into my chest like a knife. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to hold my smile. But then Dad spoke, his voice calm, like reading a report. "Honestly, we shouldn't have had a third kid. It was too much. We weren't ready. Not your fault, Ethan, but you changed everything." I blinked, waiting for Nathan to laugh, to call it a joke. He didn't. Claire sipped her wine, eyes distant. Mom folded her napkin, adding, "We said we regret it. Doesn't mean we don't love you. Don't twist our words." I sat still, the coffee in front of me cold. My face burned. My heart froze. "You just said that out loud?" I asked, voice hoarse. Claire muttered, not looking at me. "You always overreact." I stood slowly. The wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor, shattering the silence. "I need some air," I said, walking to the hallway. Each step felt heavier, leading me to the photo wall, a place I shouldn't have stopped at, but did. The wall glowed under dim light. Claire's wedding in Napa Valley. Nathan getting his lawyer award. Mom and Dad on a Hawaii vacation. Even childhood photos of Claire and Nathan, grinning at a science fair, but none of me. The college graduation photo where Dad had his arm around me was gone. Just a clean patch of wall, dust-free, like a missing tooth in a smile. My knees buckled. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. My eyes stung, but I wouldn't cry. Not here. I turned back to the hallway, grabbed my bag, opened the front door. The air outside was crisp, but it didn't ease the pain in my chest. On the porch I whispered, "They don't regret having me. They regret I'm not who they wanted." I don't remember walking to my car or driving through how many intersections to my Seattle apartment. The bread tray stayed in my bag, cold, untouched. The buttery smell now bitter, though I hadn't tasted it. In my apartment, I hung my coat, my gaze lingering on the empty hook beside it. The fountain pen was still in my pocket, cold, when I touched it. The apartment was the same, easels scattered, faint paint smell, dim light from the window, but nothing felt the same. I stood in the living room, feeling the room swallow me. No crying, no screaming, just silence. I opened a drawer, took out my old journal, its leather cover worn, where I wrote since I was 15. I didn't open it, just held it, like holding my own heart. Memories flooded back. I was 9, standing behind the kitchen curtain, about to ask Mom about a birthday gift. Her voice came first, quiet but sharp. We should have stopped after 2. I can't keep pretending. Dad replied, too late. He's here. Just try not to let him feel it. I'd smiled through that birthday party, cut the cake, posed for photos with frosting on my cheek, thanked them like a good boy. They didn't know I heard, or didn't care. I set the journal down, my eyes blurring. They never wanted me, I whispered. Their words today weren't the first, just the first they dared say aloud. I sat there, in the quiet apartment, knowing everything had changed forever. I sat on the floor, back against the table leg, the journal on my lap. The city hummed outside the window, but I heard nothing but my heartbeat. Memories of the photo wall in my parents' house rushed back, sharp as a blade. I opened the journal, flipping to a random page. My handwriting at 17 appeared, neat, hopeful. One day I'll be enough for them to regret nothing. My chest tightened. I closed the journal, unable to read on. 45 years, and that one day never came. I stared at the floor, window light, catching dust motes, like fragments of myself. I stood, setting the journal on the table, hands still trembling. I remembered when I was 30, using $50,000 in savings to help my parents save Cedar Lake estate, their beloved retreat. I'd sent the money without hesitation, thinking this time they'd see me, not just Ethan, but a son to be proud of. Mom hugged me, whispering, "You'll always have a place there." But the hug was brief, the words empty. They never invited me to Cedar Lake, never mentioned the money. It was just a transaction, not love. I walked to the window, looking down at Seattle's streets, cars flowing endlessly. I'd always tried to be the easy son, undemanding, uncomplaining. When I got straight A's, I taped the report card to the fridge myself, because no one else did. When I won a high school art contest, I told Mom it was fine. She missed the ceremony, though she was just at Claire's performance. "You're too sensitive, Ethan," she'd said. "Don't take things so personally." But it wasn't personal. It was invisibility. I glanced back at the journal on the table. A line in blue ink from age 20 flashed in my mind. "I'll make them see me, even if it takes my whole life." I gave a faint, soundless laugh. My whole life, I'd tried. But today, my parents' words were a hammer, smashing every effort. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I'd cried too much, in long nights no one saw. I sat in a chair, hands cradling the journal. The apartment was silent, save for the city's distant hum. I knew, from now on, I couldn't live waiting for their love, but I didn't know how to start over. Only that, in my chest something had broken, and I couldn't piece it back together. 2 days passed like fog, thick and still. I barely left the apartment, only going out for coffee. I didn't finish, or errands. I forgot starting. The journal stayed on the table, its worn leather, a reminder of what I didn't want to face. My parents' words, "We shouldn't have had a third kid," echoed in my head, a song I couldn't turn off. I tried to paint, but each brushstroke only made my chest heavier. Then that morning my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Family gathering. Elliot Bay Brew private room. Be there." No greeting, no apology, just a command wrapped in courtesy. I stared at the screen, rereading until the words blurred. Anna, my best friend, sat on the armchair with her notebook. Anna, my best friend, sat on the armchair with her notebook, not looking up as I told her. "Don't go," she said evenly. "You know what they'll do." I buttoned my coat, replying, "I need to know if they'll pretend nothing happened." Anna shook her head but said nothing happened. One time nothing happened. Anna shook her head but said no more. I grabbed my bag. The fountain pen in my pocket said no more. I grabbed my bag, the fountain pen in my pocket still cold when I touched it, and stepped out. Elliot Bay Brew was the kind of place people went to show their lives were perfect. Elliot Bay Brew was the kind of place people went to show their lives were perfect. White tablecloths, small vases, soft jazz from speakers. I arrived early, as usual, clutching my old leather bag. The hostess smiled, leading me past the main area to a private room in the back. I stopped when I saw the setup, a long ornate table set for 10, buzzing with polite laughter, and near the corner by the kids' play area, a small table set for 2. I pointed, saying, "Sorry, I'm with the Harper party." She checked her tablet. Yes, Ethan. Right. This table. Here. I gripped my bag tighter. Jaw clenched. This one? She nodded. Yes, sir. I pulled out the chair, the wood scraping loudly. I sat, feeling every inch of distance between me and them. The sound of kids banging spoons behind me drowned out my pounding heart. I folded my hands in my lap, staring at the untouched cutlery. Finally, Dad stood, tapping his glass. Thanks for coming, everyone. Let's eat and enjoy. Then Mom stood, her smile soft but calculated. She raised her glass, saying to Claire's promotion to regional director and Nathan's engagement. We couldn't be prouder. Truly, you two are the joy of our lives. Clinks, applause, some oohs from relatives. I lifted my mimosa, sipped slowly, eyes fixed ahead. 10 names were mentioned at the big table. Mine wasn't. When dessert was served, I excused myself to the restroom. The mirror was too clean, too bright. I looked at the man in it. Same shirt, same face, but a stranger. I whispered, even here, they need me to vanish for everything to look perfect. I pulled out my phone, texted one word to Anna. Done. She'd understand. I returned, hoping to slip back unnoticed. But Claire leaned over, her perfume sharp as her smile. You know they only invited you so you wouldn't make a scene, right? I didn't flinch. Maybe they should have let me stay invisible. The drive home blurred through the windshield, trees sliding past like ghostly limbs. I didn't turn on the radio, just silence, the kind that buzzes at the edges of thought. Back in my apartment, I didn't take off my coat right away. I stood in the living room, the air stale, as if the walls were holding their breath. The fountain pen in my pocket still carried the cafe's coffee and cream scent. I walked to the hallway mirror, catching my reflection under the yellow light. Same shirt, same face, same Ethan, seated by the kid's corner. I slipped off my shoes, slowly, like peeling off skin that wasn't mine. My phone buzzed. A new email. I opened it, ready to ignore. But the subject line stopped me. Harper Family Trust Structure Update. The sender was Cohen and Associates, the law firm that handled the Cedar Lake estate years ago. I opened the email. No greeting, just a list of updates. My name wasn't there. A small note caught my eye. Claire Harper, as sole beneficiary of Cedar Lake estate. I sank onto the couch, eyes glued to the screen. My throat tightened, like all the air was sucked out. I blinked, hoping the words would shift. They didn't. I opened the drawer beside me, pulling out an old box, labeled Cedar Lake. A folded paper from 2005 slipped out. My handwriting. I gave them everything I had, just hoping to belong. Memories flooded back like a cold wind through the window. I looked at the paper, my hands trembling. They forgot who built their fortress, I whispered, voice hoarse. I knew, from that moment, I could no longer stay silent. I couldn't sleep that night. The paper from the Cedar Lake box lay on the kitchen table, moonlight from the window illuminating my 2005 words. I gave them everything I had, just hoping to belong. Mom's promise, you'll always have a place there, echoed in my mind. Now just a lie. I sat on the floor, back against the kitchen cabinet, the wooden floor, freezing under my feet. The coffee I poured at dawn had gone cold, but I still held it, as if it could warm something beyond my hands. The worn leather journal lay nearby. I wrote a line in my notebook. I want to stop existing where I'm not welcome. The words hung there, silent as the apartment. The next morning, I called David Cohen, the family's old lawyer who handled the Cedar Lake estate. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, but his voice on the phone was still gentle, as if time hadn't passed. Ethan, he said, I remember you. Your dad always talked about you. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you still have the contribution letter I signed for Cedar Lake in 2005? He paused, so long I thought the call dropped. Then he sighed. Let me check the archives. I waited, feeling like the boy who stood outside the room, hoping his parents would show up to his school art show. Finally, he came back. I've got it. March 15th, 2005. Shows you contributed $50,000 to the Cedar Lake estate. Notarized. Your parents signed. Why do you need it? My breath shook. I was cut out of the trust. No one told me. Silence. Then he said, cautious. I'm sorry, Ethan. The trust was amended in 2015. I know because I notarized it. It was signed while you were in the hospital after the accident. Everything slowed. The room seemed to tilt. You mean they changed it while I was recovering? I asked, voice hoarse. He sighed. You weren't there. I found it odd. but I was told you'd agreed beforehand. I never agreed. I hung up, sat motionless for 10 minutes. Then I sank to the floor, back against the cabinet, hands shaking. I remembered that hospital room, stark white, machines beeping steadily, no visitors. Just a card from Anna taped to the table. My parents said they were busy managing family finances. Now I knew the truth. I didn't cry for the money. I cried because I believed them, loved them enough to forgive time after time, hoping they'd meet me halfway. I cried because I was never in the will, just an obstacle. The sun cast slanted shadows as I stood, legs stiff, heart empty. I texted Claire. I saw the amendment. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished. I waited. Nothing. I deleted the text, whispering, "They don't get to make me disappear anymore." The drive to the Harper house felt longer than usual, as if each mile was a sentence I needed to rehearse. I'd driven this road for birthdays, holidays, doctor visits, but today, I wasn't coming. As the youngest son trying to keep things smooth, I came as the one they underestimated. I parked in front, sat for a minute, watching the curtains twitch. They saw me. I wore a navy blue shirt, no jewelry, just the fountain pen in my pocket. The document box in my bag felt heavier than I expected. I climbed the steps, slowly. Mom opened the door, her face a mix of surprise and indifference. "Ethan," she said, like I was returning a borrowed item. Claire appeared behind her, holding a coffee mug, taking a sip. "Look who's here," she said, voice overly chipper. I didn't greet them, didn't step inside right away. I looked at them, two women who'd spent a lifetime curating perfection. Then I walked in. "Coffee?" Dad asked from the kitchen, not looking up from his phone. "No," I replied, setting my bag on the table. "I'm not here for tea. I'm here to take back what you stole. You erased me. I'm putting myself back." Claire smirked. "Ethan, seriously? You're still hung up on this?" I opened the document box, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Start here." She took them, flipped to the first page, then scoffed. "This again? You always make a big deal out of nothing." I didn't blink. "You cut me out of the trust while I was recovering from surgery. You took the estate I helped pay for and rewrote history to suit yourselves." Mom sat down, lips pursed. Dad rubbed his forehead but said nothing. Silence was always his favorite language. "You didn't just forget me," I continued, voice steady. "You planned it while I was unconscious, with tubes in my arms." Claire looked up, voice sharp. "You were barely coherent. We made decisions for the family's good. You weren't stable." "No," I said, standing tall. "You're the unstable ones. You couldn't stand the idea that I deserved something lasting." I placed the final document on the table. The notarized letter with my name, the date, their signatures. "My lawyer will be in touch. We'll start formal mediation. I'm not begging you anymore." Claire opened her mouth to argue, but Dad's jaw moved, then closed. I turned, grabbed my bag, and walked out. No one followed, but as I opened the door, I saw Dad slump onto the porch swing, clutching my worn leather journal, the one I'd left in the document box. He turned a page, eyes red. My words from age 15 stood out. "I just want them to see me." Inside, Mom stood in the hallway, clutching a picture frame, her body trembling. I didn't turn back. I walked down the steps, closed the car door gently, letting silence wrap around me. It wasn't justice, but acknowledgement. For the first time in 45 years, they read what I never dared say aloud. The days after the confrontation at the Harper house passed quietly, but not peacefully. The worn leather journal, now in Dad's hands, was like an unhealed cut in my heart. I imagined him flipping through pages, reading the words I wrote from 15 to 35, the pain I never dared voice. But no calls came from him or Mom. Claire stayed silent too, as if my removal from the Cedar Lake estate was a trivial matter they could brush off. I wasn't waiting for apologies anymore. I was tired of waiting. I contacted a lawyer, Julia Nguyen, who specialized in estate disputes. In her small downtown Seattle office, she reviewed the 2005 receipt showing my $50,000 contribution to the Cedar Lake estate. "This is winnable," she said, adjusting her glasses. "The notarized receipt and your parents' signatures are strong evidence, but be ready. Your family won't back down easily." I nodded, but my heart was heavy. Suing my family, the people I once hoped would love me, was something I never imagined. But I had no choice. They'd rewritten history, and I had to reclaim my part. A few days later, Julia told me Claire had filed a countersuit, claiming I was mentally unstable after a 2015 car accident that put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. The suit mentioned therapy sessions, an unstable mental state, but not that no family member visited me. Memories of that hospital room flooded back stark white, machines beeping steadily, no family, just Anna's card taped to the table. My parents said they were busy with family finances. Now I knew they were busy amending the trust to cut me out. I gripped the receipt, hands shaking. They think I'll give up, I whispered to Anna over the phone. She replied, firm. You're stronger than they think. Don't let them win. Amid the legal tug of war, an unexpected email arrived from Pacific Arts Center, where I'd held my exhibit. They invited me to speak at a symposium on art and invisibility, a theme about unseen labor, especially of those living in others' shadows. I almost declined, but Anna pushed. You need to speak out. Not for them, for you. I agreed, though my hands shook at the thought of facing a crowd. On the symposium day, I stood backstage at Pacific Arts Center's hall. The room was simple. Rows of chairs, a wooden podium, the smell of paper coffee cups on tables. The audience, artists, students, a few strangers, about 50 people, looked up with curious eyes. I clutched a stack of papers, including a journal page I'd chosen to read, if I found the courage. When the host called my name, I stepped out. Hello, I said, voice slightly hoarse. I'm Ethan Harper, painter's son, and for my whole life, someone trying not to be a burden. The audience nodded. An older woman smiled encouragingly. A few students jotted notes. I took a deep breath, continuing. I used to think being agreeable kept me safe. If I didn't complain, didn't challenge, I'd be kept. But the truth is, invisibility isn't being loved. The room was quiet, only the sound of pens on paper. Then a sound broke through. Sharp high heels clicking toward the mic. Hello. Claire's voice rang out. Sweet but icy. I'm Claire, Ethan's sister. I just want to provide some context. Murmurs. Some heads turned. I didn't. I kept my eyes forward, gripping the mic. He's been under a lot of stress, Claire said, feigning concern. After the accident, we were all worried for him. I'm not saying he's unstable, just that things are complicated. She smiled, the perfect smile of an executive. We want the best for the family, but sometimes memories don't match reality, especially when emotions run high. I let her finish. Then I turned, slowly, meeting her eyes. My sister's right, I said, voice calm. Claire's smile faltered. I was broken once. And you know why? Because I spent 45 years being erased from my own life. I pulled a journal page from my stack, holding it up but not reading. This is my journal. My dad found it, and for the first time in 45 years he cried. I didn't read aloud. I didn't need to. I folded the page, looking at the audience. Some people spend their lives shrinking, hoping if they're small enough, good enough, quiet enough, they'll be invited to the table. But some tables never have a seat for us. I paused. The room was still. Then from the left, a slow clap started. Then another. A woman in the crowd whispered, loud enough for all to hear. He said what we're afraid to say. The applause spread. Not loud but profound, like a collective breath. Claire stood there, smile frozen, then quietly left the stage. I watched her go, not angry, just tired. When the symposium ended, a few attendees shook my hand. A young student sang, thank you. I feel less alone. I nodded, but my heart was still heavy. My words hadn't changed my family, but they'd reached someone. And for the first time, I felt I wasn't entirely invisible. Back at my apartment, I sat in a chair, opening an email from Julia. Claire had sent more documents, trying to prove I was unfit to manage assets. I stared at the screen, hand tightening on the fountain pen in my pocket. They didn't just want me out of the trust, but out of the family's story. But I wasn't the boy behind the kitchen curtain anymore. I texted Julia, keep going. I'd fight, not to prove them wrong, but to remember I was right from the start. After the Pacific Arts Center symposium, I felt a strange void. My words had touched the audience, but they didn't soothe the wound in my heart. The journal, now in Dad's hands, remained a wordless question. Did they truly understand what I'd been through? Claire kept sending documents to her lawyer, trying to prove I was unstable to keep the Cedar Lake estate for herself. But I no longer wanted to fight for recognition. I wanted to find myself again. I decided to drive to the Cedar Lake estate, the retreat I'd helped save with $50,000. The winding road cut through rows of pines, the smell of sap and damp earth drifting in the breeze. When the wooden house appeared by the lake, My heart pounded. It was smaller than I remembered. Faded shingles, dusty windows, but still holding the calm my family always boasted about. I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking underfoot. The scent of pine and old wood filled the air, pulling me back to memories I'd tried to bury. I opened a door to a storage closet where my parents kept odds and ends. In the corner I found an old painting I'd done at 20, a landscape of Cedar Lake, brushstrokes raw but full of feeling. It was covered in dust, like no one had ever looked at it. I held the canvas, fingers tracing its surface. That year, I'd given it to Mom, hoping she'd hang it in the house. She'd only said, "Nice work, Ethan," then stored it away. I sat on the closet floor, the painting on my lap, and memories rushed back. I remembered 2005, when Mom called, sobbing because Cedar Lake was at risk of foreclosure. I was 30, had just sold a few paintings, and transferred $50,000 without hesitation. Mom hugged me, whispering, "You'll always have a place here." But it was just temporary comfort. They never invited me to Cedar Lake, never mentioned the money. I looked at the painting, eyes stinging. "A lie," I whispered, or a script to ease Mom's conscience. I carried the painting to the porch, sitting and watching the lake shimmer under the sun. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough. Instead, I felt a new clarity. I didn't need Cedar Lake to belong. I needed myself. The next week, I started teaching an art class at the Seattle Community Center. The small classroom, filled with the smell of paint and paper, was alive with the curious eyes of students. A girl, Lily Tran, 17, shy but creative, always sat in the corner. One day, she raised her hand, voice trembling. "Teacher, does the pain ever stop?" I paused, not because I lacked an answer, but because I just found it. "It doesn't always stop," I said, looking into her eyes. "But it stops defining you. You learn to live beyond it." Lily nodded, her eyes brightening, as if she'd found a new breath. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt I wasn't just a shadow. Helping Lily, helping the other students, was how I healed. Each brushstroke they made, each story they shared, was like a piece pulling me back to myself. One afternoon, after class, I returned to Cedar Lake, bringing the old painting. I hung it on the living room wall, not to show off, but to remind myself I'd always existed. I stepped back, watching the painting under the sunset glow. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Like me, not perfect, but enough. I took out my phone, texting Anna. "I'm finding myself again." She replied instantly. "You were always there, Ethan. You just needed to see it." Back at my apartment, I opened the worn leather journal, for the first time without trembling. I flipped to a line from age 20. "One day, I'll be enough for them to regret nothing." I smiled, not bitterly, but with relief. "That day didn't come," I whispered, "because I don't need them to be enough." I closed the journal, placing it on the shelf, not to hide it, but to let it be part of me, not all of me. I knew the legal battle with Claire was ongoing. Julia said we had the upper hand, but I no longer pinned all my hopes on it. Cedar Lake wasn't home. Home was what I built, where I chose to belong. I looked out the window, Seattle glowing with city lights. For the first time in 45 years, I felt light. Not because they saw me, but because I saw myself. The days after hanging the painting at the Cedar Lake estate, I felt a strange relief. Not because the legal fight with Claire was over. She was still sending documents to bolster her mental instability claim against me, but because I no longer let them define me. The art class at the community center, Lily Tran's brightening eyes, and the old painting on the Cedar Lake wall reminded me I'd always existed, even if my family didn't see. But part of me still waited, not for an apology, but for a sign they understood what I'd been through. One morning, while brewing coffee in my apartment, my phone buzzed with an email from David Cohen, the family's old lawyer. The subject read, "Something your dad wanted you to have." I froze, coffee mug still in hand. The email was brief. "Your dad wanted to tell you before his heart surgery last year, but he didn't get the chance. He left a document. If you're ready, I think it's time." I sat down, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I replied, "Thursday, 10 a.m. Thursday morning. Seattle's sky was thick with clouds, as if holding its breath. David's office was downtown, a quiet space with wooden walls and a secretary offering mint tea. David said little, just nodded, and slid a thick envelope across the desk. His eyes were gentle, tinged with regret. I opened the envelope, hands slightly trembling. Inside was a handwritten codicil, my dad's shaky script. The first line stopped my breath. For Ethan, because I finally saw who held this family together. There were legal terms, restoring my co-ownership of the Cedar Lake estate, but that line overshadowed everything. I exhaled, so deeply David flinched. For the first time in years, I felt a fragile balance. I drove to the Harper house in Tacoma. No document box this time, just the codicil envelope and steady hands. When Mom opened the door, her face showed more confusion than worry. Ethan, what are you? I cut her off, voice soft but firm. I'm not here to argue. I just want you to know the truth isn't lost. You just refuse to read it. I placed the envelope in her hands. She could see Dad's handwriting. I met Dad's eyes, just for a second, before turning away. They were silent, as always. But as I stepped off the porch, a sound stopped me. Ethan, I turned. Dad stood on the porch, slumping onto the swing, shoulders shaking. The worn leather journal was on his lap, open, his finger under a line I wrote at 15. I felt like extra luggage since I was 9. He cried, deep sobs bursting from a place buried under decades of denial. Inside, through the glass door, I saw Mom standing in the hallway, clutching a picture frame, her body trembling. She didn't cry, but her eyes were lost, as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't go back. It wasn't justice, but acknowledgement. A small voice in me rang out, clear and steady. It took 45 years, a journal, and a breakdown, but they finally read what I never dared say. Driving back to Seattle, I didn't feel victorious, just light. Not because they changed, but because I no longer needed them to feel enough. At my apartment, I stood by the window, holding a mug of mint tea, watching the city lights flicker. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Happy you broke them? I stared at the screen, fingers hovering. Then I hit delete. No hesitation, no blink. I didn't respond. Claire didn't deserve my explanation. I set the phone down, sipped my tea, and smiled. A small, real smile. I opened the journal, flipping to the last page I wrote weeks ago. I want to stop existing where I'm not welcome. I took a pen, adding a line. And now I choose to exist where I belong. I closed the journal, placing it on the shelf beside the small painting from Cedar Lake. It wasn't a painful memory anymore, but proof I'd lived, fought, and won. Not against them, but for myself. I knew the legal fight wasn't over. Julia said Claire might drag out the case, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Cedar Lake wasn't the end goal. It was just part of the story. I'd found something bigger. A place to belong, in myself, in the classroom, in the brushstrokes of Lily and the other students. I stood there gazing at Seattle and whispered, I'm not afraid of being alone anymore. For the first time, silence wasn't an enemy, but a companion. After leaving the Harper house, I felt a freedom I'd never known. Not because Dad cried, or Mom trembled, seeing the journal, but because I no longer waited for them to make me feel enough. The legal battle with Claire dragged on. She sent more documents, trying to hold on to the Cedar Lake estate, but it wasn't a burden anymore. I'd found where I belonged, not in the wooden house by the lake, but in myself, in the art class, in the brightening eyes of Lily Tran and the other students. I was no longer the boy behind the kitchen curtain, hoping to be loved. I decided to move to a small house, near Cedar Lake, a few miles from Seattle. It wasn't big, just a bungalow, with a sloped roof and windows facing the lake. I painted the walls blue, the color of calm, and set up an easel in the living room corner. The smell of fresh paint, mixed with morning coffee, creating a space truly mine. I didn't rush, didn't perform, just lived, day by day, with a presence I once thought was only for others. On a wooden shelf above the fireplace, I placed a single photo, not a family reunion or holiday shot. It was me at 8, holding a red notebook, ink smudged on my cheek, hair tied with a ribbon. That boy didn't know much, but he knew how to carry pain alone. Beside it, I framed a journal page, my words from age 15. I felt like extra luggage since I was 9. I didn't hang it to dwell on pain, but to remind myself I'd survived, existed, even if they didn't see. The glass frame protected the page, like I now protected myself. One evening, I pulled out a final letter, written after the 2015 accident, when my family didn't visit. It began, I forgive you, and ended, I just want to be enough. I read it twice, hands trembling slightly.
Then I took it to the backyard, where a small fire pit stood. The paper burned fast, black edges curling, turning to ash that floated away. I watched the ash vanish. No tears, no bitterness, just relief. Sometimes apologies never come, and sometimes silence is the apology. One afternoon, while cleaning the porch, I found a red ribbon. While cleaning the porch, I found a red ribbon wedged under the floorboards, like the kind I used to tie my notebook as a kid. I held it, smoothing its frayed edges, and smiled. That evening, I wrapped the ribbon around a new notebook, its pages blank, clean. I wasn't starting over. I was moving forward. I began opening a community art gallery near Cedar Lake. Not grand, but enough for people to share stories through brushstrokes. I named it Invisible Journeys, inspired by the Pacific Arts Center Symposium. The first paintings hung were from my art class students, including Lily's. She painted a bird with a broken wing, still flying, and said, "Thank you, teacher, for making me believe I'm good enough." I looked at her painting, my heart warming. I wasn't just teaching them to paint. I was helping them see themselves, as I was learning to see me. One evening, I sat on the porch, holding a mug of mint tea, the new notebook on my lap. Cedar Lake sparkled under the moonlight, birdsong blending with the breeze. I thought about the 45-year journey, the times I tried to be enough. Now I knew, I'd been right all along. My family may have hurt me, but I'd rebuilt myself, not to prove them wrong, but to remember I was right. I opened the notebook, writing a line. I no longer wait for anyone to say I matter. I know I matter. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "Think you've won." I stared at the screen, fingers hovering. Then I hit delete, no hesitation. Claire no longer had the power to shake me. I set the phone down, sipped my tea, and whispered to the lake, as if it needed to hear. "I've rebuilt, and I won't let anyone tear it down again." At the next art class, Lily raised her hand, voice steadier. "Teacher, how do you know you're good enough?" I smiled, not because I had a perfect answer, but because I'd lived it. "You know when you stop waiting for others to say it," I replied. "She know when you stop waiting for others to say it," I replied. She nodded, eyes shining. I looked at the class, young faces full of hope, and felt an invisible thread snap. Not just for me, but maybe for them too. I stood on the porch, but maybe for them too. I stood on the porch that night, gazing at Seattle's distant lights. The city kept living, but I no longer chased it. I whispered, like a promise, "If you've ever felt invisible, ever had your silence mistaken for weakness, tell me. I'll hear every story." I knew, out there were future. I knew, out there were people like me, and I wanted them to know they weren't alone. My family may have hurt me, but I'd found a new family, and I fought to me, but I'd found a new family that's ill. In the classroom, the gallery, in the classroom, the gallery, in the classroom, the gallery, in my own hearts. Ethan Harper's story reflects the pressures and psychological wounds common in today's U.S. society, where a culture of individualism and success, where a culture of individualism and success often leaves people feeling invisible. If they don't meet visible, if they don't meet family or solid, they don't meet family or society, they don't meet family or society, they don't meet family or society.
Ethan, a 45-year-old Seattle painter, endured 45 years of being overlooked by his family, cut out of the Cedar Lake estate despite contributing $50,000, and hurt by his parents' regret. "We shouldn't have had a third kid." Details like the photo wall missing Ethan's picture, the small table at the Elliott Bay brew party, and the journal chronicling pain since age 15, show he lived in invisibility, a struggle many Americans face when compared to high-achieving siblings like Claire and Nathan, or pressured to be perfect in a competitive culture. Ethan's healing journey, confronting memories at Cedar Lake, teaching art, and opening the Invisible Journeys Gallery, underscores the power of reclaiming self-worth through community and creativity. In today's U.S. society, where success is often measured by wealth and status, Ethan's story teaches us that self-worth doesn't depend on others' validation, even family. Many, like Ethan facing the empty photo wall at the Harper house, feel sidelined for not meeting expectations. The first lesson is to acknowledge pain, as Ethan did by revisiting his journal and Cedar Lake memories. Instead of burying it, write or share, as Ethan did at Pacific Arts Center. Second, seek a supportive community, like the art class where Ethan helped Lily Tran believe she was good enough. In the U.S., community groups, classes, or art organizations, like Seattle's community centers, are places to rebuild meaning. Finally, forgive to free yourself, as Ethan did by burning the letter and deleting Claire's text. Forgiveness isn't about excusing others' wrongs, but moving forward, like Ethan opening his gallery and living authentically. In a U.S. culture where individualism can make you feel invisible, learn from Ethan. You don't need others' table. Claim your own seat, even a small corner by Cedar Lake, and build your life from there. If you've ever felt like Ethan, diminished by family or society, start with a small act, paint, write, or tell your story. You deserve to see yourself. Please subscribe to the channel to share in journeys of overcoming pain and rediscovering self-worth, as I did at Cedar Lake. Thank you for listening to my story, and see you in the next video to keep exploring what matters.